He had no name. He was property, a thing to be bought, sold, and broken. His master shattered his leg, deliberately, slowly, just to prove a point, and Epictetus looked up at him and said, "I told you it would break." This man, born into slavery, crippled, unnamed, owning nothing, would go on to become the most powerful mind in the Roman Empire. Not as an emperor, not as a general, not as a senator, as a philosopher, a teacher, a slave who became free, centuries before anyone freed him. And the ideas he forged in chains? They are the reason you can read about Stoicism anywhere on the internet today. They are the ideas Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, the book we now call Meditations. They are the reason a prisoner of war survived 7 years of torture in Vietnam. This is the story of Epictetus, and it will change the way you see every obstacle in your life. The year is approximately 50 CE. The city of Hierapolis in what is now southwest Turkey. A boy is born to a slave woman. Under Roman law, that means one thing: the boy is also a slave. He belongs to whoever owns his mother. His birth name is lost to history. The word Epictetus is not a name at all. It is a Greek word. It means acquired one, or more bluntly, property. Something that was obtained. Think about that. His very name was a reminder of his status. Now, here is what most people misunderstand about Roman slavery. This was not simply hard labor on a farm. The Roman slave system was vast, sophisticated, and deliberately dehumanizing in ways that were psychologically designed to crush any sense of self. At its peak, roughly 35% of the population of Rome was enslaved. That is 1 in 3 people. Slaves ran bathhouses, managed estates, tutored children, fought in arenas, and worked in mines under conditions so brutal that life expectancy was measured in months, not years. A slave had no legal existence, no family rights, no protection from physical abuse. A slave could be executed on their master's whim, and Roman law would not even register it as a crime. This is the world Epictetus was born into. And yet, here is where the story takes its first strange turn. As a young boy, Epictetus was brought to Rome and assigned to the household of a man named Epictetus. Now, Epictetus was no ordinary master. He was himself a freedman, a former slave, who had risen to become the personal administrative secretary to Emperor Nero. He was powerful, educated, politically connected, and very, very wealthy. In other words, Epictetus did not end up in a field. He ended up inside the most powerful household in the most powerful city in the world. Fate, or whatever you want to call it, had placed him at the center of everything. But proximity to power does not mean safety. And for young Epictetus, the worst was still coming. There is a story about Epictetus that gets passed down through history, told by a man named Celsus, recorded by the Christian theologian Origen. Whether it is literally true or legendary by now, it doesn't matter, because it perfectly captures who Epictetus was. One day, Epictetus decided to torture his slave. He grabbed Epictetus by the leg and began to twist it. Epictetus, calm, without tears, without screaming, looked up at his master and said, "You are going to break it." Epictetus kept twisting. Snap. "There," said Epictetus. "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" No screaming. No begging. No rage. Just observation. Calm, clear observation. For the rest of his life, Epictetus walked with a limp. Some accounts say the damage was permanent. Others attribute his disability to rheumatoid arthritis. But every time he limped across a room, every student who ever sat at his feet saw the evidence of what he had survived, and what he had chosen not to let destroy him. This is the moment that forged everything. Because here is what Epictetus understood at a cellular level, before he had ever read a philosophy text, that most people never understand at all. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice. Your body can be broken. Your spirit cannot be touched, unless you allow it. The leg? That belonged to his master. But his mind? His response? His ability to observe rather than react? That was his. Always his. And no one, no emperor, no master, no torturer, could take it. He didn't know it yet. But that moment would become the cornerstone of an entire philosophy. Epictetus, for all his cruelty, was also a man of intellectual pretension. He permitted his slave to pursue education. It may have been a status symbol. Having a philosophically educated slave reflected well on a Roman household. Whatever the reason, young Epictetus was given access to the lectures of a man named Musonius Rufus. Now, Musonius Rufus was extraordinary. He was called the Roman Socrates, a Stoic philosopher so respected that Roman emperors exiled him, twice, because his ideas were considered too dangerous. His core belief was simple and radical: philosophy is not an intellectual exercise. It is a way of life, and it belongs to everyone, male or female, slave or free, rich or poor. For Epictetus, this was not abstract theory. This was oxygen. Here, in these lectures, he encountered Stoicism for the first time in its formal shape. And Stoicism, with its core idea that the only things truly in our control are our own judgments and responses, landed on him like a thunderbolt. He already knew it was true. He had already lived it. He had already demonstrated it, in that horrible moment on the floor with his leg. Now he had the language for it, the framework, the tradition. The Stoics taught what they called the dichotomy of control: divide everything in your life into two categories. What is up to you, your thoughts, your judgments, your responses, your effort. And what is not up to you, your body, your reputation, the actions of others, the weather, the economy, whether someone loves you back. Everything in column 1. Train it, master it, own it completely. Everything in column 2. Release it completely. This is not passive resignation. This is radical, ruthless focus. Epictetus absorbed all of this, and then he went further than any Stoic before him.
He was freed. But here is the part that will genuinely surprise you. By the time anyone granted him legal freedom, he had already been free for years. Stay with me.
Sometime after the death of Emperor Nero in 68 CE, Epictetus gained his legal freedom. The exact circumstances are unknown. Perhaps Epictetus freed him as a reward for his education and service. Perhaps the household collapsed in the political chaos that followed Nero's death. The same death Epictetus had helped bring about, by the way, holding the knife that Nero could not bring himself to use, as the emperor wept and lamented, "What an artist dies in me." Whatever the reason, Epictetus was legally free, and he began to teach. He set up in Rome in the way of the ancient philosophers, not in a formal academy but in public, in conversation, challenging students with hard questions, refusing to teach anything he did not himself practice. His reputation grew fast. This was unusual. Former slaves did not simply become prominent intellectuals in Rome. The social hierarchy was brutal and rigid. And yet people came because Epictetus had something other teachers did not. He had lived it. When Epictetus talked about not fearing death, his students knew he had stared at it. When he talked about releasing the things outside your control, his students knew he had had even his own body taken away, and had chosen not to give up his mind. There was no gap between what he said and who he was. He never owned much. He lived in deliberate simplicity. His most prized possession, according to legend, was a small iron lamp, which was eventually stolen from his home. He replaced it with a lamp of clay and never pursued the thief, reasoning that you can only truly lose what was yours to begin with, and the lamp had never really been his. When he died, that clay lamp was purchased by an admirer for 3,000 drachmas. A small fortune. For a lamp made of clay. Because it had belonged to a man who understood what was truly valuable. In approximately 89 CE, the Emperor Domitian issued an edict expelling all philosophers from Rome, and from all of Italy. Domitian was not a fan of Stoics. The Stoics had a habit of producing political dissidents. Men and women who looked at tyranny and named it clearly without flinching. Several Stoic figures had openly criticized the emperor. Domitian responded the way insecure rulers always do, by silencing the people who made him feel small. So Epictetus packed what little he owned and left the city. He traveled to Nicopolis, a town in northwestern Greece on the Adriatic coast, a busy trade hub. A crossroads city where merchants, soldiers, and travelers from across the empire passed through constantly. There he founded a school. Not a palace. Not an academy with marble columns. A simple building where he taught in conversation for the rest of his life. And the world came to him. Wealthy Roman families sent their sons to Nicopolis specifically to study under Epictetus. Think about what that meant. Imagine sending your child across the Mediterranean to sit at the feet of a former slave in a provincial port town. That is how powerful his reputation had become. Emperor Hadrian, who succeeded Domitian and reversed the exile, visited Epictetus personally at his school. An emperor making a house call to a man who had once been owned. And among his students came a young man from a wealthy family named Flavius Arrian. Arrian was so moved by what he heard that he did something that would save everything Epictetus had built. He wrote it down. Epictetus himself never wrote a single word. Like Socrates before him, his philosophy existed only in conversation, in challenge, in response, in the friction between teacher and student. If Arrian had not taken notes and refused to let them disappear, we would have nothing. Epictetus would be a footnote in someone else's history. Instead, Arrian produced the Discourses, 4 books preserving Epictetus's lectures, and the Enchiridion, a compact handbook of Stoic practice that has never gone out of print in 2,000 years. The Enchiridion, the handbook, the little book that soldiers carried, that prisoners memorized, that changed the life of Marcus Aurelius, that may, if you let it, change yours.
So what exactly did he teach? I want to give you the 3 core ideas at the center of his philosophy, and I want to explain why they are far more radical and far more demanding than most people realize. Because understanding them is one thing. Living them is something else entirely.
Epictetus built his entire philosophy on one question, to be asked about everything in your life. Is this up to me? That is the whole game. That single question. The first idea, the dichotomy of control. In his Enchiridion, the very first line reads, "Some things are in our control and others are not. In our control, our opinions, our motivations, our desires, our responses. Whatever is our own doing. Not in our control, our body, our reputation, our status, our property, what other people say about us, what they do to us. Whatever is not our own doing." This sounds simple. It is not simple. Because most of us spend most of our time and emotional energy in the second column. We obsess over what other people think of us. We agonize over outcomes we cannot control. We ruin entire nights of sleep over things that are, in the deepest philosophical sense, none of our business. Epictetus says stop. Radically, completely stop. This is not giving up. It is the exact opposite. It is an act of total ownership over everything that is actually yours, your attention, your response, your character, your effort. You stop bleeding energy into the things you cannot change, and you pour everything you have into the things you can. The second idea, prohairesis, the will within. The Greek word Epictetus used again and again was prohairesis. It translates roughly as moral choice or the faculty of rational will, the capacity to decide how you respond to whatever happens to you. Epictetus elevated this above everything else. He called it divine. Literally, the spark of God inside each human being. The one thing no external force can ever reach. You can be enslaved. You can be beaten. You can be starved, mocked, humiliated, and exiled. All of that is not up to you. But the moment of choice, the space between what happens to you and how you respond, that is yours. Always. Under every condition. Without exception. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, wrote almost exactly the same thing 2,000 years later. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. He was channeling Epictetus. He may not have known it. The third idea, philosophy is not talk. It is action. Epictetus was openly contemptuous of people who studied philosophy as an intellectual hobby. He had no patience for students who could quote ancient texts perfectly at dinner and then lost their temper at their servants before breakfast. He said, "Show me that you are not merely learning philosophy in order to talk about it. Show me that you are applying it. Right now. In this irritation. In this failure. In this insult. In this moment of grief or anger or fear." He also said, "It is not circumstances that trouble people, but their judgments about circumstances. You do not need better circumstances. You need better judgments. And better judgments come not from reading, not even from reading Epictetus, but from the daily, grinding, unglamorous practice of applying the philosophy to every single moment that tests you. Not just the big moments, the small ones too. The traffic, the slight from a colleague, the plan that falls through, the goal that doesn't arrive on schedule. That is where the philosophy either lives or dies. In the small moments. That is what Epictetus meant by the good life. Not comfort, not status, not safety. A mind that is free, a will that is trained, and a response to the world that reflects your deepest values, regardless of what the world throws at you. Epictetus died around 135 CE, at approximately 80 years old in Nicopolis, surrounded by students, having never owned much, having never written a word. And then the ripples began. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man alive, emperor of Rome, surrounded by armies and marble and absolute authority, kept a private journal. He never intended it to be published. He was writing to himself, trying to become a better man, holding himself to a standard that power and privilege made it easy to abandon. In that journal, the one we call Meditations, he returns again and again to the ideas of Epictetus. The man who had everything read the notes of a man who had had nothing, and tried every single day to live up to them. Then 2,000 years pass. Vietnam. A Navy pilot named James Stockdale is shot down over North Vietnam. As his plane goes down, he has one clear thought, a thought that will carry him through 7.5 years as a prisoner of war, through torture, through months of solitary confinement, through years of darkness with no certain end in sight. I am leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus. He had memorized the Enchiridion before the war. He applied it in the camps. He emerged, not unscathed, not unbroken physically, but undefeated in the place that mattered. He said later that Epictetus had saved his life, not as a figure of speech, as a literal statement of fact. Today, cognitive behavioral therapy, the most widely practiced form of psychotherapy in the world, is built on a central idea. It is not events but our interpretation of events that causes distress. Aaron Beck, the father of CBT, wrote explicitly that its philosophical origins trace back to the Stoics. To Epictetus specifically. Every time a therapist helps a patient examine and change a thought pattern, that is Epictetus working in the room. In offices, in clinics, in hospitals, in every corner of the world where human beings are trying to understand why they suffer and what they can actually do about it. The slave with no name, no possessions, no written words, no legal rights in the most powerful empire in the world. His ideas are in the notebooks of emperors, in the memories of prisoners, in the practices of therapists, in the philosophy that perhaps found its way to you today. So here is the question Epictetus would ask you, not gently, not academically, but directly, because that was his way and he never softened it. What are you spending your energy on right now that is not up to you? What are you losing sleep over that belongs in column 2? And what is in column 1? Your actual power, your real inheritance as a rational human being, that you are neglecting because you are too exhausted from worrying about the things you cannot control. The slave who became a philosopher did not wait for better circumstances. He did not wait for freedom or health or comfort or recognition or the right moment. He decided, in a room that was not his, in a city that did not acknowledge his humanity, with a leg that someone had deliberately broken, that his mind was his, that his response was his, that his life, however constrained on the outside, was sovereign on the inside. That is the entire philosophy. And you can start living it today. If this resonated with you, if you feel like you found something useful in the story of this man, I have 2 requests. First, read the Enchiridion. It is short, 40 pages. It will take you one focused afternoon. It might change your next decade. Second, subscribe to Warrior Philosophy. We are building something here, a library of lives like this one. Stoic biographies told as mini documentaries. The real stories of the people who figured out how to be human under impossible conditions. Epictetus was just the beginning.